Hello lovely people and welcome. Today I am playing with another Christmas gift. My lovely father gave me this set of White Nights watercolors and a very nice metal case to put them in. So these are based on reviews, are fairly good watercolors, so I would go ahead and test them out. But first I had to set everything up. So the case came with little buckets, but so did the watercolors came in their own, so I had to just remove all the buckets and unwrap each watercolor and put it in its own little case. I had a little bit of supervision for this part. This is Nicolas. So yeah, I went through all the colors, put them in their case. And at the end I actually had a little bit of extra room left, which was kind of nice. So I put back a couple of the little buckets from the original set, and those I can probably use for extra mixing spots or something like that. And then after that I decided that I would make a little reference sheet of all the colors, because the way they dry doesn't tend to look like the way they look in the tubs. So I went through for each color and made a little reference thing. I started with the color fairly dense, not very dilute, and then kind of as I went over to the right of each little box, diluted it out a little bit, so that I could try to get a little bit of a gradient, see what the colors would look like on a gradient as they got more pale, more watered down. And while I was doing this, I decided to go back and do it for various other paint sets I have. The acrylics I used in the previous video, and a tiny Winsor & Newton travel palette, watercolor palette that I have. So that was kind of cool. And this is what I came out with. I had cut the sheet and made it so it'll fit in the case, so everything's kind of cool. I like that. So to test these out, I did not show sketching the picture, since it never seems to show up well on the video, but I decided to try to do an ocean wave with a lot of nice blues and greens, and a little bit of purple for the darkest part. And these watercolors are very nice. I found them relatively easy to control and highly pigmented. I was able to dilute them a bunch, not take a whole lot out of the box, out of the pan, to dilute into something thinner to use in the picture. One of the things that I constantly forget while working with watercolors is just how much lighter they get when you dry them out. So yeah, I ended up having to do multiple layers, and well, that's pretty standard, but more layers than I expected, and overworking the paper a bit. Another thing that I'm still not used to is how much patience you need to have while working in watercolor, and really do a layer and let it dry, and then come back and do another layer and let it dry, and not try to quickly achieve something of the density and saturation that you're expecting. So I am still living and learning, painting and learning. But I was using a couple of reference photos just to kind of get an idea of what the waves actually look like, and the way the light goes through them and the color changes. And I did a lot of working wet into wet here, and that mostly worked. Wet into wet is a nice technique for blending, but one of the things with it is you have to be very careful with just how wet your paper is, because if the paint you're putting down and the wetness of the paper are too different from each other, you get this cauliflowering effect. And I'm getting a little, you can see it on the inner edge of the curl, and near the end you can see a little bit of it later on the left side of the dark part of the wave. So controlling exactly how wet the paper is and how wet the paints you're putting onto it are is a trick, and I am still working on learning that. The reference I had really nice gradations of blue to teal and some green, and I was working hard to try to capture some of that. And I did. It doesn't come out with exactly the same colorations as the reference photo, but I like what I ended up with. And I did, as well as doing a light pencil sketch that I didn't film, I also used some of the latex resist that I have. And you can kind of see it under the paint on the top edge of the wave at this point to try to put in some of the wave spatter, the white water spatter that you see. And then also down on the curve of the wave coming down. And then for the part down in the ocean, which is a much darker blue, to darken it up, there were two ways to go about this. One was just layering blue over blue, but I thought adding a little bit of purple into it would kind of capture that nice deep tone. So I tried to do that, and then I went over it with blue, kind of in a glazing method. And I think that mostly worked. Here I'm definitely overworking the paper. The paper is way too wet. I should have waited in between these layers and let it dry before doing more, but patience is not one of my virtues. So I was working too wet and overworked the paper. And then here I was trying to get some of the striation look. You can kind of see the curl of the wave. And one of the things I did not do in this painting, which I would like to experiment more in the future, is the really minute light dark kind of spots you see a lot in water. Here I was trying for kind of a more blendy, I want to say watery, but that's not really right, effect. And I may go back and try to do something a little more realistic later on, playing with water. Here I was just looking more at the differences in colors, working throughout the wave. And then I went in and did the background. The background was kind of a pale gray purple. And again, I always forget just how much lighter it dries than the paint I put down. You can kind of see that in the dark part of the wave right now, and also that cauliflowering effect over on the left, that little dark bit, which bled strangely into the curvy part of the wave. That's not really ideal, but it is what it is. Then I went in and tried to get some of that dappling of the wave on the bottom by putting down paint and blending it off a little. I did a lot of work of putting down paint and then pulling it off with a washcloth here, because I wanted these markings to be very, very subtle. And overall, I think that worked. Right now, they're a little bit too stark, but I went over with some water and some other colors, kind of washed colors, and I think it blended in pretty well. And also here I was working with trying to blend the colors. So starting with a layer of one color and then putting in a layer in a lighter green and blending that in on top. There's a technique called glazing, is going over and basically modifying the shades in one layer with a transparent layer on top of it. And so I did a lot of that on this. And then a lot of just kind of playing with paint on the tip of the brush. What I'm doing here is I'm using a straight brush and then I'm kind of putting it down with the tip at different angles to try to make the spray at the edge of the wave work. I think that mostly worked out okay. And then I did several layers in the sky because I forgot just how much lighter it goes. But that was actually nice because then with each layer of the sky I could blot out the spray and it wouldn't be exactly the same each time, which means I'd get that kind of soft effect, and that worked out pretty well. And I did a bunch more work playing with trying to define kind of the edges of the wave without having it look too harsh, and kind of the wave form again without making it look too much like a sharp edge. I wanted the edge to be kind of soft. Then I let everything dry, and then I went and rubbed off the latex resist solution, and so you can see the white spots that were protected by the resist working out for the spray. And I decided that I didn't like it completely. I didn't think there was quite enough of it, and this White Nights watercolor set actually doesn't come with a white, but the watercolors I've been using, the Koi watercolors, do come with a Chinese white. So I went back in with that Chinese white and did some spattering along the edges of the wave to make the spray look a lot more present, because there's a lot of spray on a crashing wave. And so what I did was first I tried just brushing my finger along the tip of the brush, and that really didn't work very well. And I tried, smashing the brush against my finger, and that worked pretty well. I had some time. You can see I got a bigger spot there. I did a couple of times where I got bigger splotches, which I went back and removed. And I worked with figuring out just, how much water I needed in the white to make it splatter well, but not so much water that you wouldn't actually see the spots. So I was playing around with that a bit here. This is, again, not a formal piece. This is a learning experience and experimental piece with the new watercolors. And I learned a great deal. I think the result is it's a somewhat abstract rendition of a crashing wave. I like the gradations of color that I got. In the end, I'm pretty happy with the spatter on top. I think for dots like this, doing a resist really doesn't work. So spattering white on top is the way to go. I have to look into if there are any other methods that I can use for that. But I think overall it worked out quite well. So yeah, this is this week's experiments in painting with watercolor. As always, thank you so much for coming and listening to me experiment and learn. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and be well. Thank you so much. And there is the final piece.